Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to put on my doctor cap here and public health perspective. So with regards to travel advisory, for those listening at home, just go to CDC Zika Travel Advisory, and you'll get a lot of information and country-specific information. Going back as far as February, the advice has been, if you're pregnant, do not travel to endemic areas. If you're of childbearing age, the advice is not to travel to endemic areas, but if you are going to travel, to take precautions, birth control, et cetera. We've also been working with global health agencies to increase access to birth control in endemic areas until we get ahead of Zika virus and we fully understand what's going on. If you have to travel to these areas, obviously take mosquito precautions, repellents, et cetera. Avoid going out, at dusk or the times when the mosquito's biting. In addition, back in February we had a hearing. We had Dr. Frieden and Dr. Fauci come over from the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Disease. Dr. Fauci at that time was quite optimistic by the end of the year that we'd have a vaccine for clinical trials. I will be honest, I was skeptical that we'd be able to develop something as quickly as that. A few weeks ago I had a chance to go visit Dr. Fauci and his team at the National Institutes of Health. They will be ready for clinical trials, phase 1 trials, starting in September. And a very important aspect of our getting ahead of Zika is that vaccine development and the science behind vaccine development. So, September's still after mosquito season, but we are moving fairly rapidly to get ahead of this and address it. The bigger component here, though, and each of the witnesses touched on this, is 2 years ago we were talking about Ebola, we're talking about Zika this summer, and the world is a much smaller place right now, and vectors, infectious disease, viruses move much more quickly. It's not as though we haven't known about Zika for years. We've known about this since the 40s, and it's not that the virus has mutated. The virus has moved. It's now in a densely populated area, and we are starting to see this pop up. And what we have to do as a body and as is provide adequate resources to the CDC, to the NIH to do the research, but to understand that we are going to be battling these infectious diseases much more frequently, and we've got to support the science. Dr. Ernst, I'd probably toss it over to you with regards to both Zika, certainly as we get a vaccine developed, disseminating that vaccine and making sure it's effective, but then also just more broadly as an epidemiologist and someone who studies this, what we ought to be doing right now to prevent the next infectious disease and how we ought to be thinking about some of this.
So you're talking more broadly, any infectious disease?
More broadly, yes.
More broadly. I mean, I think some of the things that we can do is really understand where a lot of these infections are originating from. A lot of these are diseases of poverty. They're diseases where you have countries and places that have no infrastructure to be able to respond and control the epidemic in their own boundaries. And when you have something that is going on in another place and you have, as you said, a very globalized world, it doesn't take a lot for those viruses or bacteria to come over here. So I think shoring up resources in other places to ensure that there's fewer pandemics in those areas as well is a critical step. And then also investing in research and understanding where those threats might be more likely to come from is also very important.
It's wonderful. And again, I think for the public and for my colleagues in Congress, it is very important that we don't just fight the disease here, that we actually go to where these infections and these viruses are endemic and originating. And there's a reason why we fund global health. There's a reason why we fund the CDC to go do research and go to these endemic areas. And as we look at these fundings and we look at our budgets, it's really important for us, because if we don't get ahead of this in those endemic places where the viruses, they will certainly pop up here. And we've seen it time and time again with SARS, with various infectious diseases. And again, in a smaller world, we will see this more frequently. I'm running out of time. As Ms. Bonamici said, I could spend 5 hours asking questions. But we also have to then adequately fund the science as well. So we come up with those therapies to both control the vectors, but then also to get ahead of this. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.